Welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining. My name is Richard Sand, founder of IDF Connect, and I specialize in identity and access management and single sign-on, and have been working in the IT security space for the entirety of my 25-year career. And my company, IDF Connect, we have software and solutions around the space of single sign-on authentication and access management. And as everybody knows, the big challenge in recent years has been in the hybrid cloud and how to do things that were traditionally done on premises and maintain those same levels of control and capability in this new world. And so that's what we're going to talk about today. And I'm going to focus on our talk today about APIs and the use of APIs for security, how to standardize and hit upon the API approach that's right for your organization. And I'm going to describe an approach that IDF Connect has taken to create and espouse a general set of APIs for single sign-on authentication and access management that will work equally both on-prem and in the cloud. My company has a product called SSO REST, which is our implementation of this API. But the approach that I'm going to describe to you today is not product specific. It's not even language specific. We're in an API world where services are written in RESTful languages with standard expressions for payload like JSON, and so that's what I'm going to talk about today. And so you can take what we talk about today and apply it to applications that you're building. Geez Louise, I think I have my phone off. Applications that you're building or integrating if you have legacy applications that you need to tie into new systems. If you have commercial off-the-shelf products that you're looking for an integration approach with the commercial products with other applications you have. And it doesn't matter where those applications are. They can be your applications in your enterprise, in your cloud, on Google, Amazon, Azure, etc. So without further ado, let's get started. And as Jacob said, if you have any questions, please type them into the chat window or raise your hand. I had the privilege of giving a presentation at this conference 2 years ago, and of course that was not a virtual conference. So the challenge with the virtual conference is for me is to not sort of babble for 50 minutes and not even know if anyone's out there. So please interrupt, raise your hand, ask questions. I'd be thrilled to make this as interactive as possible. So agenda, just real quick, I'm going to set the stage for what the challenges around access management. Access management also incorporates authentication and single sign-on. Has always been a challenge, cloud hybrid or not. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about what access management means in general and sort of set the stage. Then we're going to talk about security APIs and why it's so important especially in this day and age to decide upon a set or a suite of APIs. Obviously, you want something that's extensible, but you want to introduce commonalities where you can. We're going to talk about simplicity, and when I talk about simplicity, I'm going to get into the developer mindset and how app developers like to work and build apps today. We talk about the continuous development integration, CI/CD approaches that most companies are now using for streamlining app development, and how security and these security APIs are a crucial component and enabler of that. And then as we wrap up, I'm going to introduce this notion, sort of building upon the app developer view, of what I call declare and go, for a method to add drop-in protection to applications. And then dive a little bit into how my company's SSO product is architected, again, to show you what the approach is. We have a very strong belief at IDF Connect that there is no such thing as secret sauce. So the more that we can tell about our approach and how our product has solved the challenges for top tier enterprises, if that gives you sort of ideas or inspirations or approaches that you can apply in your organization, then we've been successful. So starting with what the challenge is, I'm going to try to blitz through this because the challenges have always been there. So it's these challenges are not new challenges, and in fact, this next section of the presentation, we could take this back in time, 20 years, 25 years, and still have the same slides, still have the same conversations. The need, the requirements have always been there. The needs have always been there. But what has changed over the years is the risk and the importance of addressing them. So what is web access management? So first of all, just a quick about terminology. One thing that it can be very confusing to folks in the industry with acronym spaghetti and whatnot, is sort of the conflation of access management with a specific protocol such as SAML or OAuth or OpenID Connect, which are commonly used for single sign-on, and they are used for authentication and access, not so much access enforcement, but maybe the conveyance of roles and identities and access privileges. And so the technologies, these different protocols, are important aspects of web access management. But web access management is larger than that, and it's a practice, the web access management. It's not a specification or a protocol. Another buzzword that flies around in the industry is zero trust. And when this term became popular 3 or 4 years ago, it became sort of wildly successful in marketing material, and yet the term is used in completely different ways depending upon what space a particular company or vendor is in. So zero trust when it comes to web access management simply means the notion of making sure every request to your application of any sort from any source is inspected and vetted before your application is actually invoked. And that's what zero trust means. It means that you have the mechanism to make a yes/no decision. Like, is this good traffic or is this spurious traffic? And of course, access can then get very granular. Like, is this person an employee? Do they have manager privilege, and are they allowed to do that on Sunday night when they're logged in from Uzbekistan, as opposed to in their home city Monday to Friday? So we can get very complex with what vetting means. Zero trust simply means you've got some minimal baseline of visibility into the requests that are coming in before the request gets into the guts of your application. And then, what's happened with cloud is that certain capabilities of access management that were already challenging have become even more intractable with the advent of cloud and cloud hybrid architectures. And what we're going to talk about is some techniques to, mitigate some of the additional obstacles that cloud hybrid introduces. Right? And how do we restore the full capabilities in a hybrid world? So the why is pretty straightforward and intuitive. Access management means you're watching everything. I mean, it doesn't make a lot of sense to have a lot of security on the front door when your windows don't have any security. The second thing is about centralization and visibility, especially when you have security at scale. In other words, if you've got one door to your castle, well, okay, you watch the front door and you're good. If you've got 50 doors or 100 doors or 1,000 doors, then you can't have one person running around to every door checking on them. You have to have a centralized capability to have a guy at a desk with monitors. So that's the analogy I'm making. You need, at scale, you need some sort of visibility that can meet your scale. And sometimes it's not just a question of scale, then it becomes a question of where your applications are running. In other words, you may have certain controls that are, again, you can put them in place for your on-premises applications, but when your apps are running on AWS, then then it becomes more challenging to maybe implement some of those controls.
Richard, you did have a question in the chat.
Perfect.
It was best practices matters a lot from employee, owner, and vendors. Your ISP is of utmost importance. The one you use for backbone, do you agree?
Is the ISP an important part of your security model? It absolutely is. If you especially, again, these things, as you scale up, as enterprises or organizations get larger and larger, your ability to watch all the front doors, gets stretched. And, attackers are clever. Attackers are able to, whether they're writing bots or sitting there at a keyboard trying to, hit your app, they can disguise where they're coming from and try to get in through different ways. And it becomes important, even in enterprises that have heavily invested in their access management capabilities, their proactive controls, their monitors. They need to work with their ISPs, especially if there's attack traffic that you need to block. Your ISP is your front door. So it kind of, it's a little bit of a silly analogy maybe, but if you think about a medieval castle, and you've got your castle, and you've got your moat, and you've got your drawbridge, blah, blah, blah. The traffic coming to you, the roads that lead into your domain, those are controlled by your ISP. And, an ISP one of the ways that I vet an ISP and decide on who's going to bring my traffic to me. You can look at the obvious things like availability and multiple geolocations and things like that. But I want to see how well an ISP cooperates with me if I'm in a forensic mode. If I'm trying to investigate an attack, or I'm trying to block, denial of service attacks, or attacks that I can, that are obviously automated and controlled by bots and whatnot. And I'm getting bombarded. It's very difficult. To coordinate that if your ISP doesn't have the capabilities. You need to make sure that your ISP has capabilities that are commensurate with, your own controls. Let me know if that answered your question. If not, ask a follow up in the chat, and happy to continue that thread. So here I'm just pointing out some common gaps that are in the cloud. In other words, when we take, as I said, access management is a discipline unto itself, and it's a challenge unto itself. And it's been a challenge for as many decades as we've been developing internet-facing apps. But when we start to move to a hybrid cloud model, and eventually, the destination is to get to a pure cloud model where data centers are dinosaurs of a bygone era. Certain aspects of access management tend to get lost, and that's what this diagram here is meant to convey. That doing things like authentication and single sign-on across disparate apps, especially across disparate app platforms like AWS or Amazon, that's one challenge. But there are pretty good technical mechanisms for achieving those. But other aspects like fine-grained access control enforcement, risk scoring and analytics, session management, and centralized audit really tend to get lost or become more and more intractable as more of our apps go outside of our traditional perimeters. So basically, I'm saying if you want a complete web access management solution, you want to handle all these areas. So let's talk about the API aspect of this. Security APIs, traditionally, I've worked in security for a long time, and I can't say that the relationship between IT security and app development has always been a completely rosy hand-in-hand relationship. There are when you're imposing, or that's the word, when you're saying, okay, we have to do security in a certain way, and your app developers are trying to meet the requirements from an organization or a business. They're trying to meet end user requirements. They're trying to develop apps that are modern and avant-garde and all these good things. Security is often seen as an impediment as opposed to an enabler. So the trick here is how do we make our security backbone an enabler and work well with our app development processes. So the challenges are different depending upon your scale. If you have one application or one application that you develop in house, and your sole focus is on that application, then how you can really sort of say, okay, well, you can make security decisions that are really tailored to that application. When you start to get applications en masse, 2, 3, 10, 50, 100, 500 applications, then it becomes much more difficult to make decisions that don't constrain somebody somewhere. Like some app developers would be like, oh, I don't want to do it that way. I want to do it some other way. Um, but the more, the less homogeneous your solution is, the harder it is to manage security, both managing it proactively and making sure that, people only have access to what they're supposed to be doing and they can access it when they're supposed to be doing it. Or in the forensic mode where you're trying to figure out what happened or even if something bad happened. Um, so, we want to be able to maintain the ability to control security centrally, then leave security up to an application. But we have to do that in a way that understands and cooperates with our app developers and architects and the people that are building the solutions that our businesses are dependent upon. So one of the tenets is this notion of centrally declaring security. So security fundamentally can be handled declaratively or programmatically. Okay, and declarative security means that you're writing what's called a descriptor. It's not code. It's definitions. It could be in a format like XML or JSON, but or annotations even. But the point is that you're sitting down and sort of logically spelling out what the security controls are for an app, and codifying that in some fashion. And so then when you're codifying that, you can do that, in your code directly, whether it's controls or annotations, or you can use these descriptors and sort of externalize those definitions from your code. So what I like to recommend, especially when you're dealing with multiple applications, and especially even applications that may have different architectures or different programming languages or platforms, is that you want the ability to centrally declare your security policies. Now, what that means is that the security policy definitions for how users authenticate and access your applications is centralized so that there are controls that are not just baked into the application. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that you remove controls from your application. I mean, if your app developer wants to put in a check that says, hey, when somebody invokes this invokes this function or this capability, I want to do a sanity check and make sure they're logged in, that they're an employee, and that they're a manager. That's great, but I want to also make sure that there's a front door so that I'm not relying solely upon the application for security. So that's what centrally declare means. Consistency. I mean, consistency is key. That consistency makes your lives easier for your app developers, because you as a security function can interact with app developers and make sure everybody understands what the expectations are. You can support different platforms and different approaches and languages because you've got consistency. And then in the runtime management, you've got a common understanding even across all of your applications. If you're doing if you're doing analysis or monitoring or forensics, again, you need a consistent and well-defined approach to grease the wheels for all the activities that come downstream. Whoops, didn't need to advance quite yet. Wait, I seem to have hit the end key. Apologies. We were here. Oh my goodness. I need to go to remedial PowerPoint school. Survey says, yay. All right. User experience. So user experience from an access management standpoint means things like users only have to sign in one time. Users only have one identifier. Users can use the same credentials, whether it's a password or some sort of two-factor auth. They can use them across their different devices and the different applications, and basically have an understanding of how things work. You can do things like how you recover a forgotten password, or how you allow a user to say, yes, this is a trusted device, so that you decrease the friction if the user's on their work laptop, etc. Uniform user experience. You can achieve this even between apps that are on-prem and in the cloud, apps that are Java versus .NET, apps that are Windows versus Linux, etc. And yeah, security is important. So,
Richard,
let's talk about
we do
a
have
little more detail into what these requirements translate to. So some of the traditional requirements that I said have been around for years are the needs for authentication, authorization, single sign-on. That's funny. There are a lot of technologies out there that grab onto the single sign-on as a buzzword and say, hey, we provide single sign-on software. Oftentimes, single sign-on isn't actually a requirement. Sometimes between certain applications, or if you think about SaaS vendors that have multi-tenant apps where single sign-on across them is actually a no-no, that it has to be blocked. There might be fiduciary reasons or separation of duty or whatever. Really, the requirement is about authentication and authorization, or as it's sometimes called.
Hey, Richard, we do have a question real quick.
Sure, please.
How would you secure user management APIs of SaaS solutions if you are on the consumer side?
Okay, if you are on the consumer side, so you have a consumer-facing SaaS application. Raise your hand or type in a comment if I'm not understanding the question right. So your consumer side SaaS applications, that means that you've got, say, some e-commerce application. You are the SaaS. You are subscribing to your e-commerce app as a service, and it's a consumer-facing application. And you're concerned with things like user registration, your end users doing getting signed up or forgetting their password, or managing their account, maybe subscribing to additional additional privileges. In the SaaS world, SaaS is a little bit different than your own applications that you've built, whether they're running on-prem or running on infrastructure as a service. Like if you're building VMs at Amazon EC2, or you're standing up boxes in Azure and deploying your apps. SaaS is a little different because you don't own the app. You're a tenant in the app, and therefore it's your SaaS vendor who has the responsibility of making sure there are security controls in there. So unless your SaaS vendor will allow you to install, additional, whether plugins or security controls or whatnot to those apps, you're a little bit beholden to them to make sure that they're providing the mechanisms that you need. So if the SaaS application is the entirety of your app, then it's okay for that SaaS application to own your users. In other words, they're providing the app and they're also providing the user directory or user storage for your app, and they're also providing the interfaces to access that user data. But if the SaaS application is simply one of many or several applications that are in your portfolio, and you need to make sure that a user, can register, can single sign on, can get access to the proper areas, can do all the things that a end user needs to do in a uniform way across the SaaS app and other apps that are part of your portfolio, whether they're also SaaS or written at home or whatever. Then yeah, you've got a challenge. Now, major SaaS vendors, thinking of these are more corporate facing things like ServiceNow or Workday, but the same holds true for e-commerce vendors. They recognize this. They have this requirement already. This is not a new requirement. So, I mean, and it really it wasn't introduced by cloud, it was introduced by the SaaS model. So there are some standard identity management protocols, if you will, something called SCIM, S-C-I-M, or, Microsoft and its graph APIs, and there are others as well. And a lot of times they're going to be predicated upon some sort of identification at the trust, between your organizations. So how does your organization identify itself to the SaaS application so that it can enable you to do certain user management operations through whatever their APIs happen to be. And that typically is going to be built upon something like SAML or OAuth or OIDC, some of those spaghetti acronyms I mentioned at the beginning, which facilitate a secure handoff from one organization to another. But it's a great question, and there's certainly a lot of work to be done there because you're now dealing with the decision making that isn't your decision making, it was your SaaS vendor's decision making. Again, I hope I properly addressed what you were asking. If not, fire away again, or feel free to ask a follow-up. Okay, so blitzing along here, I need to pick up the pace a little bit and to try to leave room for questions at the end. So traditional requirements, authentication, management, and audit. Then now there's, and then what happens in the cloud world is we need to take access management that, has traditionally lived within an enterprise or within a data center and offer it in a way that it can be consumed by applications wherever they reside. And what that means is it means transforming web access management to a service type of integration model. And by doing that, that's how we achieve what I mentioned here in making sure that there aren't gaps between what a web access management solution should be and what we typically can achieve in the cloud hybrid. So by transforming access management into something that can be consumed in the cloud, we we make sure that we don't hit any gaps. So this is how IDF Connect has sort of looked at the major requirements of web access management to be to be modern and support cloud hybrid. And some of these are, are not new concepts. But again, the going to a cloud and cloud hybrid has like ratcheted up the importance or ratcheted up the risk associated with not handling these properly. So modular and going from left to right, modular and pluggable. If you look at some of the traditional vendors in the access management space, there's been a tendency from security vendors to try to build bigger and more powerful and more monolithic application platforms for security, and it's too difficult. The space is too big. I mean, there are security companies. One that I love to to mention, a company called 51 Degrees that has a huge database of mobile device vendors and every mobile device they've ever launched and the firmware versions and the versions of the browsers that are installed on those devices. Now, why does this company do this and why is their business there? Well, what they do, it's really clever, is they keep a list of known combinations of hardware, firmware, and software on devices, so that when some 14-year-old kid is out there downloading a script kit for making some sort of malware, those scripts don't normally keep up to date with mobile devices and what patches. Anyway, it's a really neat service meant to identify traffic that comes from legit known device types versus robots and nefarious software that's out there in the sort of the community, if you will. And I mention this as an example simply to point at how specialized security has been. So companies that try to make monolithic one-size-fits-all solutions fail. So enough about that. Of course, a modern solution has to support all the modern languages, HTML5 and AJAX, different mobile platforms, Node.js, the notion of single-page applications. If you're familiar with single page or what an SPA is, which really kind of turns access management, the traditional access management, on its head. Traditional access management for web apps was URL 1 can be accessed by these people, and URL 2 can be accessed by some other people. And in a single page app, your app is one URL. How do you have centralized declared access controls in a single page app? Well, it is a little tricky, but there are certainly plenty of approaches to doing it. You just have to have them planned out in advance. I'm going to jump down to the right side now. So, based upon industry standards, there is not a single security standard for all things web access management and single sign-on. There are for bits and pieces. There are, protocols for single sign-on. There are protocols for authentication. There are some access protocols like XACTML that sort of handle some of this. You're not going to find one size fits all, but to the extent you can, you want to base your solution on industry standards. And when there's not an industry standard, you still want a standard. It's just your standard. DevOps friendly. Well, this is really key now. Everybody knows what Agile is, and everybody's doing development work in 2-week sprints, and they're doing their scrums and et cetera, et cetera. And love it or hate it, this is the MO for most development shops in these days. And so your security tools have to facilitate DevOps. A very simple example here is if you have a security framework, a developer needs to be able to go home, plug their laptop in, not necessarily being on your network or your infrastructure, and be able to write their app and test it on their local machine with your security framework part of that implementation. You can't, the old school way was the developer writes an app, gives it to a SecOps team, and they bolt on top of it a security layer. And that just doesn't fly anymore. And it certainly doesn't fly when developers are continuously releasing code every 2 weeks. And that leads me to the sort of the keystone here, which is what I call deploy and go. And deploy and go is a technique that IDFC has championed to make the security framework 100%. A developer can do it on their laptop, drop it in a library, and just be a part of your security infrastructure. So here I'm listing out, just some of the common APIs that you're going to need. Some of them are obvious, some of them are maybe you can put some additional thought into. There's authentication and authorization. There's also a difference between logging in and validating an existing session or updating a session. Simple things like if you go from an application, you go from app 1 to app 2, and when you're on app 2, you hit log out. And then you go back to app 1 and you're still logged in there. So something like single log out is just an example of part of what needs to be in your security framework. And I apologize for picking up the pace here. Again, the tenet is to be able to have your applications reside anywhere, run on any platform, not be constrained by vendor or by development language. Working with your developers and allowing them to develop on their own. I talked about that already as being really important. Containerization. Again, if you take sort of some legacy access management or legacy security products and you try to containerize them, and you're trying to containerize your apps and your servers, you find that a lot of security products fall down when you're trying to containerize. So that's something that has to be part of your framework. Simplicity, to get app developers from pushing back on security to embracing security, you give them simple APIs. Because your app developers, they have to be able to ask these questions. There's no avoiding it. So you give them a way to ask the questions in the simplest way, and then security is making your app developer's job easier, not harder. And then lastly, what I call declare and go is the ability to have a frictionless enforcement point. So in traditional security apps, as I said, it was a bolt-on top of your application. You'd go and you would install the security software on top of the application or in front of the application using some sort of proxy. And that whole model does not work with cloud and containerization. What we need is a way for the developers to simply, when they're declaring their application, say, pull in the security. And without having to even use an API, without having to write a single line of code, simply by declaring your security libraries as part of your app declaration, that app participates under the umbrella of your security framework. And that's really the ultimate goal, to have frictionless enforcement capability, to have the centralized declare capability without interfering with the CI/CD processes that app developers are using today. So I think that covers all of the key approach, the key elements I wanted to hit upon. and I believe this presentation will be made available to everyone who wants to download it. Now I'm sort of getting into how the SSRS product achieves these things, but again, that's not that's how we achieve it. We've covered all the topics of the approach, and you know, I'm showing a before and after. You know, traditional data center, you've got security software and something bolted onto your different apps, and the after is a completely distributed delivery of security, but maintaining a central management of security, and that's our goal now. A lot of stuff about platform. So I think we've gotten where I needed to go. We do have a few minutes. If there are any questions anybody wants to ask, any topics you want to bring up, you know, in our last few minutes, please go ahead.
Yes. Anyone who has any questions, please put it in the Q&A or the chat, and I will read them out. Other than that, please remember to, as you sign off, to put in, to fill out that survey at the end. Greatly appreciated, so we know what is what's working and what's not. And yes, all presentations will be made available on the Did You Know website at dtis.delaware.gov. So basically, where you registered in that area is where all the presentations will be in the next day or so. Other than that, we thank you, Richard, for presenting. It is presenters like you that makes all of this possible. So thank you very much for joining us. And we'll just stick around for 2 more minutes to see in case anyone has any questions. Right now, I don't have any, but.
Yep. No, thank you, Jacob, and thank you everybody for attending. I hope you found you know, something you know, interesting in this conversation, and I'm happy to you know, continue. My contact information is all there. I'd certainly be happy to continue any of the conversations we had, the questions that you asked today. Other than that, stay safe and enjoy the rest of the conference.